Okay, let's stop and review what we've done in this section. So we learned about contextual selectors, the fact that we can make our selectors more specific, and that as we do that, there's a variety of ways to do that. So here's the way where the selector is an element inside an HTML element, and when you do that, every HTML element will have the style applied, no matter where it is. If you want to do two different kinds or more, you can just add them and put a comma between them. So you put a comma between them, then the style will be applied to all of the p elements and all of the h1 elements. A descendant element is to separate it with a space. So here we're saying we want the p elements, but we only want the p elements that are a descendant of article. And so it'll pick up the p elements that are descendants in the article element, and not any of the p elements that are not in the article. And that's the descendant. And you just use a space. Here, we want a paragraph that is a child of article. So it's not just a descendant, so it can't be grandchildren. It has to be the child of article, and it picks up those elements, and that's where the style is applied, only to those paragraphs that are a child of article. When you use a plus or a tilde between them, that's indicating a sibling relationship. And the plus means a sibling right next to it. So we want a paragraph that is the sibling right after the H1. So a paragraph that is a sibling right after H1. If you use a tilde, then it's all the siblings of the H1. Notice that came in two different places, right? In both of those. It didn't matter whether they were in the article or the aside. It's just talking about its relationship with its sibling. So it picked up the siblings in the aside and in the article. The asterisk is used to mean any element. So here we're saying a child of article, any element that's a child of article. So it picked up all the children. Another way is to do attribute selectors, and these are based on the attributes that are in the HTML tag. So here, this H1 has an ID attribute set to title, and so in the CSS, we can refer to that using the pound sign. We can say H1 pound title, and that gives us H1 that has an ID set to title. Or we can just do the pound sign title, which is just and that says any element that has ID set to title. Now, IDs are meant to be unique, so you don't have multiple ones of these. It's meant to uniquely identify a single element. A class attribute, on the other hand, is used to can be applied to multiple elements. So here we've got an H1 that has class set to intro and a paragraph that has class set to intro. And we can access those in our style sheets. H1.intro will apply this style to this heading 1 that has the class set to intro. We use the dot to specify class. Or we can do dot intro, which means any element with class set to intro. And that would pick up both the H1 and the paragraph. Another way to do an attribute is to specify the attribute. And here we have an A with an attribute href, and that'll pick up all elements with an href attribute. That will be all A elements, right? Or in this case, we can say if the href element is equal to a specific value. So here this will pick up an A element that has href set to index.html, and that's the only place that it'll be the style will be applied. It'll only be applied to A links that have the href equal to index.html. And there are other ones that say, this is a part of what it is, the value of it is. So, or this is the first part. Anyway, there's other ones too. Specificity is a big deal. Specificity in CSS resolves conflicts. Now, this only is an issue if there are two style rules for the same element that are in conflict. And then CSS determines which style rule wins. And we went over how that specificity works. We learned about the font family property, that this is a list of different font families called a font stack. And the browser uses the first one that it can find. And it finds them on the user's machine first, and then if it can't find that, it'll use that last one, the generic one. And here are the generic fonts. You can also add a font using a file, and we learned how to do that. We learned how to add if we want a bold version of the font as well, or we could add italicized if we wanted that. We learned about the font size property and different units to be able to do that. Absolute units relative to the device using a pixel, or scalable font sizes where we use the EM or the REM. We learned about the spacing properties, letter spacing and word spacing. 0 is standard. You need to go negative or positive to make it smaller or bigger, and you need small numbers make a big difference. We learned about line height, where we can set what we want the line height to be. Normal is 1.2. We make it bigger than that, then the line takes up more space. If we make it smaller than that, then each line of text takes up less space. Text indent allows us to indent the first line in a group of text, so like a paragraph. And if we can use a positive, if we want the first line to be indented, negative if we want the first line to be a hanging indent. We learned about a lot of different styles. So we learned about font style, font variant, font weight, and we had already done size, height, and font family. But we can combine those into a single property font and list a value for each one. The only two that are required are size and font family, but we need to put them in order. Whichever ones we use need to be in this order. There's some other text styles. There's so many. Text decoration, text transform, and text align, and then we used text align. Vertical align, we didn't have a good example of that, so we actually didn't use that one. And there's a lot of things that we can do with text on a web page.